Tonight, Gabby Giffords fights on. How to save a coral reef. And kids in the wild.
They're trampling on my rights to raise my kid as I see fit.
French President Emmanuel Macron has spent a lot of his first official visit to the U.S. cozying up to Trump. But today, when Macron addressed Congress, the bromance was gone. Macron warned about an imminent threat to the world order from policies like trade protectionism, anti-environmentalism, and extreme nationalism. Basically, everything Trump supports.
I do not share the fascination for new strong powers, the abandonment of freedom, and the illusion of nationalism.
The Supreme Court took up the third iteration of Trump's travel ban, an executive order limiting immigration from Muslim countries. Today's oral arguments suggested that a majority of the justices think the president does have the authority to ban immigrants from Muslim-majority countries, if he believes it will protect the U.S.
What if the military advisors tell the president that in their judgment, the president ought to order an airstrike against Syria? The president says, well, does that mean he can't because you would regard that as discrimination against a majority Muslim country?
The High Court will likely issue its decision in June. Democrats on the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee released a summary of allegations they've collected about Ronnie Jackson, the White House doctor who Trump wants to run the VA. The document says staffers called Jackson the Candyman because he handed out so many prescription meds, including, in one case, the opioid Percocet, that Jackson was often drunk on the job, and that he crashed a government vehicle after a going-away party, which Jackson denied today. Two of his colleagues quoted in the document call working in Jackson's unit the worst experience of their lives. The governor of Texas is demanding that former Congressman Blake Farenthold cover the cost of a special election to fill his seat by donating $84,000. That's the amount of taxpayer money he used to settle a sexual harassment claim years ago. In a letter, Governor Greg Abbott wrote that, quote, taxpayers should not again pay the price for your actions. Today, the Congressional Republican baseball team took the field for the first time since a gunman attacked their practice nearly a year ago.
We never got to finish the practice that we started.
4 people were injured that day, including Majority Whip Steve Scalise, who's still recovering and couldn't attend the practice. When news of the Nashville Waffle House shooting emerged on Sunday, one of the people speaking out was former Arizona Congresswoman Gabby Giffords, a gun safety advocate who's called for all assault weapons, like the one used in Nashville, to be registered under the National Firearms Act. Giffords herself was shot in the head at close range in 2011.
Let's go.
We're delighted to have Gabby Giffords.
Yay.
And her work as a gun violence activist is all the more grueling because of her injuries.
Thank you for all your work, Gabby.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
But that's not stopping her from charging ahead.
We did this before.
Yes. Yes.
We did it before.
Yes.
And we'll sing Om together. Exhale. In the beginning, it was super interesting because Gabby would really only work, we would do everything one-sided. You know, we went from crutches to a cane to the dog to nothing. She's so busy, she travels so much and works so much.
50-50.
Yeah, 50-50?
50-50.
Okay, well, it's good to keep that balance, but sometimes we've got to sort of bring it back and bring it back home and bring it back to center. Because especially when you have something devastating happen,
Shot in my head.
I know. What the hell?
Weird.
What was that all about?
The Safeway store.
When Gabby went back to the Safeway store a year after she was injured, she remembered basically 2 things. She remembered where she
parked
where she parked.
Yes.
And then you remembered something else.
Oh, mittens. Mittens.
Did somebody bring you mittens?
Yes.
Because it was cold.
Yes.
But that's it. So largely because Gabby was the first person shot, and also that she was shot in the head. Gabby being injured, I don't think it necessarily has changed what I felt the definition of being a good husband is. It might not be the job that somebody else would do. You know, I just try to do the best I can under the circumstances that we've been dealt with. Gabby wins contentious race, November 8th, 2006. My wife was in the hospital, still getting treatment for her traumatic brain injury and doing therapy and surgery. I can't overemphasize the importance of compartmentalization, which is focusing on the stuff you have some control over and not worrying about the stuff outside of your control.
Not to the gun lobby. To the gun lobby. To the gun lobby.
I think my role is part of many different important roles in your recovery. I mean, certainly working on your communication and your language skills and getting words to come more easily, being able to resume your public speaking life, I think has been really important. So let's do just this part.
We'll always stand up to the gun lobby.
Good.
Always,
Good. We'll always
stand up to the gun lobby.
Good.
You know, the gun lobby says these reforms are an infringement on your rights. They're not. Nobody's trying to take away anybody's Second Amendment right if you're a responsible person. Gabby and I are both gun owners. I've owned a firearm my entire adult life. I mean, Gabby from
Tombstone, Arizona.
Yeah.
Wild West.
So, I mean, she was the congresswoman who had Tombstone, Arizona. So, of course, she should own a firearm.
Yes.
And this isn't about, like, you know, responsible gun ownership. You know, this is about the irresponsible people out there.
Okay. Visit.
I miss Congress a lot.
Yeah.
I miss Congress a lot.
What do you miss about Congress?
I'm so busy.
It was a busy job?
Busy job, but a good job.
We must stop gun violence. Protect our children, our future.
Almost.
Our students. Let them lead the way.
Stopping gun violence takes courage. The courage to do what's right, the courage to new ideas. I've seen great courage when my life was on the line.
We must protect, educate, and inspire the future.
Be bold, be courageous. The nation's counting on you. Thank you very much.
Scott Pruitt is going to face tough questions about his spending habits at 2 congressional hearings tomorrow. And it seems like he's edging closer to becoming a liability the GOP can't afford. But the EPA administrator isn't just good at buying fancy office supplies. He's racked up one success after another in service of his goals at the agency. Pruitt has been checking rule changes and regulatory rollbacks off his to-do list for the past year. These are just some of them. And though many have ended up in court, that's not necessarily bad for Pruitt's anti-regulation agenda. Endless court battles obstruct and slow down the agency. A chronic lack of cash has always limited the EPA's enforcement. But Pruitt asked for $2.5 billion less to cover its budget in 2019, a massive 23% cut. and wants to kill programs including cleaning up the Great Lakes and preventing children's exposure to lead. A new rule announced yesterday stops the EPA from basing its rules on scientific evidence if the underlying data isn't public, in the name of scientific transparency. But that's a huge issue, because most health studies use confidential and sensitive personal data, so the EPA will have to stop using them. That could affect how it evaluates everything, from the toxicity of consumer products to safe limits for air pollution. When Pruitt took office, links and references to EPA research and publications disappeared from the website. That's not just a public information problem. It limits EPA employees' ability to use their own research for enforcement and rulemaking. Pruitt's strategy of obstruction is effective. The agency's not catching polluters like it used to. It ordered just $1.6 billion in fines last year, 1/5 of the amount in 2016. So Pruitt's living up to the goal he declared on LinkedIn when he was Oklahoma's Attorney General, which is still listed on his page today, saying he's a leading advocate against the EPA's activist agenda. Even if he wanted his expenses kept quiet, his message is loud and clear. In 2016, a single bleaching event significantly damaged a full third of the Great Barrier Reef, according to a new study in the journal Nature. The findings illustrate just how vulnerable the world's coral is to global warming. And in Australia, that's forcing an urgent reckoning: how to balance a long-term strategy to save the reef against the short-term needs of an economy that relies on tourism and fossil fuels.
Terry Hughes is a renowned coral expert who's worked on Australia's Great Barrier Reef for 30 years. He says the reef today is unrecognizable compared to when he first began studying it. So what are we seeing down there?
There's a bunch of dead tables just here. We saw some live coral over there. So the mortality is very patchy. This site was very hot during the 2 bleaching events. So it's got higher than average mortality, about 80%.
Corals are animals that provide homes for thousands of marine species. When the ocean warms, they freak out and expel the colorful algae that live in their tissues. This turns corals white, thus the term bleaching. But this isn't an aesthetic problem. Algae provide coral with food, so without them, many die of starvation. Bleaching events aren't new, but they're happening more often, a fact that's intimately linked to global warming.
So under the current trajectory of warming, we can expect to see annual bleaching everywhere in the tropics by about 2050. So it's really critical that we deal with global warming, or we simply won't have coral reefs in the future.
According to some estimates, reefs around the world generate around $30 billion each year in goods and services, and 1 billion people rely on them for food and income. In 2016, Terry flew over thousands of miles of reef to document how bad the bleaching was. And as he watched the reef deteriorate, his view of what it means to be a scientist changed drastically, causing him to pivot towards climate policy.
In terms of the Great Barrier Reef, do you think that the Australian government is doing enough?
No, I don't think the Australian government is doing enough. Australia's emissions are now increasing again. So Australia is still promoting the development of fossil fuels, particularly coal seam gas and coal.
The Australian government's been widely criticized for its failure to act on climate change.
This is coal. Don't be afraid. That coal is part of the energy mix of the world today and will be for many decades to come.
The government also faced pushback in January when it announced a $60 million funding package for initiatives including growing new coral, but allocated no money to curbing carbon emissions.
It costs somewhere between $1 and $5 million per hectare to restore corals on a reef. If you scale that up to the amount of coral that died in 2016 alone, we're talking about $4 trillion. The solution's vastly more expensive than the cure. If we took that $1 trillion, we could put solar panels on every house and factory in Australia, and we'd never have to burn coal again.
So what exactly is the solution when it comes to the Great Barrier Reef?
Deal with climate change. It's the elephant in the room. There's an element of kind of a smokescreen whereby governments, and I'm not just talking about the Australian government, are saying we can fix this without actually dealing with the root problem.
Terry's radical stance has churned up controversy, and his message is a source of frustration for a lot of people, including members of the tourism industry. You famously called Terry Hughes a dick. Why did you call him a dick?
His comment was that the marine tourism industry was shitting itself about its future, and it's just simply not true. But there's a big difference between being concerned and shitting ourselves. And he did enormous damage to our industry.
Why do you think that saying very strongly that the reef is dying and being kind of unequivocal about that, why is that the wrong approach to getting people to take action?
Look, the simple thing is that if you continue to tell the politicians in particular that the reef is dead and dying, then no one is going to sit around and vote for $1 million or $1 billion to try and do something to protect it.
The government plan doesn't mention emissions. Do you think that's an oversight?
Look, I think it's a deliberate policy of this current government that it does not want to identify climate change as being a significant cause.
Do you think that climate change is caused by humans?
Absolutely, I believe it's caused by humans. But even if I'm wrong, it doesn't matter. We still need to clean our act up. We've got an industry that's totally switched on to trying to do everything we can to protect it. So, yeah, there are naysayers out there. There are people out there that would say the reef will be dead in 5 years. And I've been listening to that kind of comment for the last 30 years.
Cole and Terry are representative of a larger divide in Australia. Aside from the government, most people agree that climate change is the biggest threat to the Great Barrier Reef. But there's a fundamental disagreement about how to communicate that threat and what to do about it. A disagreement that Anna Marsden, the managing director of the Great Barrier Reef Foundation, is all too familiar with.
One of the things that's played out in the last couple of years was we had the mass coral bleaching, because we've had scientists say the reef is in trouble. This is a crisis that's unprecedented. We are facing a moment of truth. And then we've had tourism operators go, well, the place I take my boat out to with a room full of tourists, it's good, nothing to see here. And the reality is both of them are right.
That dispute has consequences, though. It affects how money is allocated between different strategies for fixing the reef, some of which don't tackle climate change at all.
There's no excuse to not focus on policy changes and us all as a planet reaching Paris. But in the short term, there are things we can do to reduce the number of corals that we lose in the 30 years it will take for us to reach Paris. Without doubt, we don't get mitigation under control, we're not going to save the reef. We're not going to save any reef in the world. And not only that, this is just the canary in the coal mine. This is the first ecosystem that's going to fail.
Benny Carson is 7. His mother wants him to be able to walk home from the bus through this park alone. But the Cinnaminson school board won't let him.
I simply wanted my son to get off the bus. I grew up in Vermont. We walked everywhere. We walked home. It wasn't a big deal. When he wasn't allowed to get off the bus, I asked the superintendent, I asked the transportation director, and then I went into policy.
She's talking about the school's transportation policy. It requires her to be at the bus stop, or else her son will be taken back to school.
Hi, baby bear. Hi.
Carson's a school teacher and can't always make it to the bus stop in time, so she has her son dropped off at daycare.
Let's say, forget the daycare, let's pretend he's going here. Gets off the bus at his assigned bus stop.
Mm-hmm.
What's that walk?
900 feet.
What's in that 900 feet? Are there, gangs and mines and, people having knife fights and the jets and the sharks?
It's a very quiet neighborhood. There's just a park and there's a swing set.
Carson's months of appeals have all been for naught. The superintendent told her in an email that, quote, "Our policy is not in place to protect the district from liability. It's in place because we believe it's the best practice to ensure safety and security for all of our students."
Your mom is like fighting this battle so you can actually walk home from the bus. What do you think about that?
I think it's actually pretty weird.
You think it's weird?
Yeah.
Why?
It's like, why do we have to fight a battle against walking home from a bus stop?
Carson is part of the growing free-range parenting movement. They reject what they see as a culture that unnecessarily coddles kids. They argue that as the world has gotten safer, kids are no longer allowed to just be kids.
It's not about the 900 feet, really, is it?
No, it's about the fact that we are raising these children who don't know what to do with themselves.
Wait, what are we making?
We're making fajitas.
I want to use
Careful, wash your fingers.
this one.
Okay. Free-range parenting is allowing your child to fall down and allowing them experiences where they can learn firsthand, not hovering and telling them. Children don't learn by telling. Forward, there you go.
Did you poll parents? Are they mostly on your side?
I don't think they're on my side. I do think that I'm a little bit rogue here, but I think that that's my choice. That's my call.
So how long of a walk would it be from here to your house?
Maybe 2 minutes.
So how old's your son?
My older son will be 7 on Friday.
Okay. What would you think about letting him walk home from here?
Absolutely not. I miss my childhood where we would disappear all day. Go on our bikes, ride around the neighborhood. We had a creek behind our house, and we would just follow the creek, walk along it all day long.
But you wouldn't let
parents
your
had no
son do
idea.
that now.
No.
What changed?
I mean, you can hop on Facebook and see who's on vacation, who's letting their kids walk home from school. Kids are on Snapchat showing pictures of themselves alone at a park. Within seconds, if you're a child predator, within seconds, you can be at a location where a child is and know that there are no adults there.
Such fears are understandable, but they're not supported by the data. There are approximately 75 million children in the U.S. In 2011, about 65 were abducted by total strangers. Carson appealed the superintendent's decision to the state, but officials told her it was a local issue.
I'm trying to be as respectful and follow, the due process and do what I can, but I have a feeling that in the end, he's got 12 months. He'll be allowed when he hits 3rd grade.
Which is 2 months from now, I believe. Wait, no.
A year and 2 months.
Oh my!
But you're ready now? You're ready now to go, free range.
Yeah.
What happens next?
The state doesn't really seem to want to be involved in anything local, so it really is going to end up meaning whatever the board says is going to end up being the law.
But if someone offered to do this pro bono, would you fight it?
Absolutely. They're trampling on my rights to raise my kid as I see fit.
That's Vice News Tonight for Wednesday, April 25th.